The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program, and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Welcome to our view on public safety. Once again, I am Chief Richard Aguiar, Chief Inspector of Services and the Director of Fall River Emergency Management. Today I have two guests from EMS. They are the EMS training officers, Captain Beth Ferguson and Lieutenant Mike Finnegan. They're in charge of training EMS members to become actual paramedics. I don't know paramedics, but EMTs in the city. So, Captain Beth, how does one become an EMT and what's the qualification? How do you actually start?
So when you actually start to become an EMT, you have to go to schooling first. So there's really no prerequisition except to have your high school diploma or a GED. You do have to have an active driver's license because you are driving an ambulance, so you really do need to have those two. We have our own program here in Fall River. It's through the Fall River EMS Education Center, so we run programs twice a year. It can run anywhere from, a day program can be anywhere from 6 to 7 weeks, whereas our night program goes about 12 weeks. It's 2 nights, 1 day on a Saturday. Once you complete that, that's just the in-class portion. So that's coming in for lectures 2 nights a week. And then Saturdays is our lab day, where kids will come in and they'll train. And at the end of that, they will test with the state of Massachusetts. We clear them, and then they'll go take the National Registry exam. And once they're there, we help them apply to get their Massachusetts EMT license. And then from there, they'll be certified EMTs in the state of Massachusetts.
So what's the age?
You have to be 18.
18 years old, okay. So anyone that's 18, clean record, do a query check?
Yep, we do a query check, so you have to have a clean record. So that's pretty much the only requisitions that we ask for ahead of time.
So, Lieutenant, I know some people prior to even doing training, they ride the ambulances as well to get training, correct? Mm-hmm. So they see firsthand what's going on. They can now when they're on the ambulance, they're not EMTs or paramedics. They can't assist. All they can do is watch the paramedics or EMT, right?
Yeah, you'd be strictly in an observation role. Even if you have a CPR certification or something along those lines, if you're over age 18, you would strictly be in an observation role. So you'd be under the watch of either a senior paramedic or an officer in the street, and you can observe on our trucks, but you would not be hands-on with any patients or participating in any interventions or anything like that. It's more to get a feel of how we operate in the street, how you see interventions being done on patients, certain performances and things like that we do in the back of the ambulance and on the way to the hospital. But yeah, no, it would be a hands-off process if you do not have that certification.
Okay, so one question just came to mind, and it's not on my list, the Good Samaritan law. So we hear a lot about Good Samaritan laws. If someone comes upon a car accident, or if someone pedestrian down, or something such as that. Some people in our world today may be reluctant to help that person. Mm-hmm. So either one of you can answer this. How does that cover the people, a civilian who is not in public safety like we are, just someone off the street? What does that pertain to as being the Good Samaritan, or how does that protect the person?
So the Good Samaritan law was made so any individual in the public, if they do see a car accident, some people do carry Narcan in their cars, so if they do see someone overdosing and they want to stop to help, they will be covered under the Good Samaritan law, which means that nobody can go after them legally because we have a duty to act as paramedics and EMTs, whereas a civilian person doesn't have that duty to act. So the government and legislatures has made this Good Samaritan law where if they were to do something to help a person and harm comes out of it, they can't be held liable if something does happen to that patient.
You brought up a good point, Narcan. And no matter where you go today, Narcan is available. And anybody can distribute Narcan. Now, the Narcan is the nose, or is it by
nasal? Well, nasal. You can do both. We will do it intravenously, so we'll put an IV in somebody and give it to them that way. But our EMTs and first responders and just a layperson can actually just give nasal Narcan. So it looks like a nasal spray that you just put it in their nose and push it and it aerosols into the air.
So there's no liability to that if something happens to that person? Like,
Nope.
So in other words, if you're going to give somebody Narcan, even though they're overdosing, you can't do more harm to them, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Narcan's a benign medication.
Benign medication.
Yeah, if you administer it to someone who doesn't need it, perhaps it wasn't an overdose or it was a diabetic patient, if you give someone Narcan, it's not going to harm that patient. The only thing it's going to do is pump the medication into their nose, but it will not further, the problem that could be at hand if it is not in fact an overdose.
So another question comes to mind. I don't have it on there. Talking about Narcan EpiPens, and we spoke about that at our training.
Yes.
In
the first aid class.
Yes, So let's talk about EpiPens for one moment. Can anybody apply an EpiPen, right?
An EpiPen.
As well?
They can, but you would only want to give an EpiPen to somebody who's actually having an allergic reaction. As a civilian, you can walk into a pharmacy and get Narcan from the pharmacist. You cannot walk into a pharmacy and get an EpiPen to carry on you. It's only prescribed to people who have an allergy to something. And usually that person will carry it on them. So if you are out and you're with a group of people and someone says that they have a known allergy to nuts or bees or whatever they may have it and have an EpiPen on them and something happens, you can administer it, but you should be trained on how to actually administer an EpiPen. Usually family members are trained. We do teach that in our CPR first aid classes on how to administer an EpiPen. So if you are American Heart Association, Heart Saver, First Aid CPR, AED certified, you would be certified in how to properly administer it.
And at the training that we took, matter of fact, I took it with you as
Yes.
well, there's a different type of EpiPens. There's different types and different companies that produce these, right?
Yeah, they come in different, every manufacturer makes it differently. And then there's two different doses. So there's one made for children and then one made for adults. Some of them out there, when you take it, it talks to you, just like an AED would. And then others, you would have to know how to properly administer it before giving it.
There are instructions written on an EpiPen, similar to like an AED. They'll have those written instructions, but generally you want to have that experience or that training to effectively administer it.
So AEDs, we're talking about different products out there to help people, and that's not on my list either. I apologize.
That's okay.
AEDs, you just mentioned EpiPens can talk to you. Once again, I think if somebody sees a person having a heart attack, of course you have to identify the symptoms first, as you know, touch, call, talk to them. People may be reluctant about using that because they don't know how to actually use that. Well, it's self-explanatory. Lieutenant, you want to speak about that?
As far as when to use an AED and when not to? So generally what you would look for when you are suspecting need for an AED is you find somebody that's unresponsive, and by unresponsive meaning that you've tapped on them, you've yelled to them, shouted, try to get them awake or alert enough to talk to you. And if you get no response, generally that is an acceptable time to look for an AED. An AED is not something that you would just defibrillate someone with right away. It will tell you whether or not to defibrillate that person. So just simply putting the pads on someone is not going to harm the person. It will tell you whether or not to shock. And it won't allow you to shock if it's not advised. So generally what you would look for is somebody that is completely unresponsive, not speaking, not able to open their eyes, and not able to communicate with you in any way. If somebody's talking, alert, making noise, generally they would not need an AED. Not at that time anyway.
Right. Let's talk about paramedics. You have EMTs. Now, the different level of EMTs is, am I correct to assume that?
There's 3 different levels. So you have your EMT basic, which is your basic level of your EMT training. And then you have what we call an EMT advanced. So it's a little bit higher skill set than an EMT basic can do, but a lower skill set than what a paramedic can do. An advanced can put an IV in somewhere where an EMT basic cannot. And then you have your EMT paramedic. And paramedic school, from start to finish, is probably approximately anywhere from 18 months to 24 months. It can take up to 2 years because the schooling is longer. So remember I had said an EMT class takes anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks to take an EMT class, depending on where you go, where a paramedic program can take you up to 2 years, where you have to do your didactic portion, which is the in-class portion. And then when you finish with that, you have to go into a hospital and do clinical hours, which ranges anywhere from 200 to 300 hours in a hospital setting. And then once you complete that, then you need to do ride time on an ambulance with another paramedic to sign you off, saying that you are able to do the skills and you can do the patient assessments like you're supposed to be doing, to be out there to be working as a paramedic. And that, depending on your schedule, can take a few months also. When you finish that, it's the same thing as an EMT basic. You do take a national exam and you become nationally certified, and then from there you can apply to the different states to get your state license.
So on the level of being a nurse and a paramedic, is it pretty close, or the nurses have more training, or is it?
It depends on the type of nursing that you work in. Being an RN is a much broader field than being a paramedic. Nurses have more formal schooling, especially with the BSN and the Bachelor's of Science in Nursing being so common nowadays, where you do not need a bachelor's degree to become a paramedic or an associate's, whereas a nurse you would need either or. So it depends on the field of nursing. We cannot do as much as nurses, but we can do different skills as nurses than nurses can. So in an emergency room setting, for example, the nurses that we're most familiar with and how they operate, there's medications that they administer that we are not trained in, but there are procedures like intubation and certain things like that that we do that they will not generally do. So I wouldn't say we do more or less than them. They're a little different in how they operate.
So you can actually intubate in the field if somebody needs to be intubated, the tube down their throat for their breathing and all that. You can do that as well.
Correct.
Now you have to be a paramedic to do that, or an EMT?
Paramedic.
Paramedic. So that's the level where a paramedic differs from an EMT.
Yeah.
They have more.
There's a lot more medications that paramedics can give, along with different skill sets. Paramedics can do a lot. We always tell people we're pretty much an ER on wheels. You get things inside the back of an ambulance that you would find normally in an emergency room setting. So we can do things out in the field that some nurses aren't trained to do. But like Lieutenant Finnegan had said, is there are some things that they can do that we can't, but there's things that we can do that they can't. It's just because we're in such a quick emergency setting where we may need to fix something right away, where we don't have time to kind of wait till we get to the ER, depending on your location. We're lucky here in Fall River where we have 2 really close hospitals in our vicinity. But you go out more like the Midwest as paramedics, they can do a lot more than what medics here in Massachusetts can do because they have such a longer transport time.
So, paramedics and EMTs, different levels, they do have different skills, different things, which is good. And all that is treated in-house, correct? I mean, in-house, you teach all that stuff, or most of that stuff, or paramedics?
The paramedics you learn in paramedic school.
Okay.
We do not run a paramedic program here in Fall River, so most of them go to different programs throughout the state, but we do get a lot of their students that come and ride with our paramedics here to get their skills down. And our medics will sign off for them to be able to go test at the national level.
So I remember back in the day, because I've been around for a long time, when they used to scoop the patient up, throw him in the ambulance, the guy would drive it to the hospital, and that was it. Maybe every so often I saw where, if a gunshot wound or a bad stabbing, a cop would ride the back of the ambulance, but there was no EMT, there was no paramedic, there was nobody. You just scoop them up, throw them in the ambulance, and tie them down, and just hope they don't fall off the cot and get to the hospital.
It's a little more involved now, yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny when you look at that, those days to where we are today, EMTs and paramedics in the field actually save people's lives, whereas 30 years ago, 40, well, I remember when they started EMS in Fall River, it was Chief Shea, when it was Rescue 2 and Rescue 3. And they actually had firefighters that were on the rescue back in those days. Now, that's a good question. What was the transition from firefighters to now civilian EMTs, but part of the fire department? When was that transition?
They transitioned, I want to say back in 2014, 15, where firefighters here in the city need to be EMTs. Mm-hmm. They do not work on our ambulances, though.
No.
They work strictly on the engines, where we have our own set of paramedics and EMTs that work on the ambulances here in the city.
So the firefighters have to go through a first responder course with you guys as well, right?
We do. We actually run their EMT program for them.
And now, I know all the people that become the new guys that become firefighters, this class of 7 just now, they have to go through the entire EMT course to be certified as basic EMTs?
Yes.
Or the first responders? EMT?
They go through an EMT program with us.
So they're already certified in EMT, and they can actually assist you guys out there. Because most calls now, the fire side, an engine will go to a call, and a ladder truck will go for a lift assist.
Yep, so they are certified EMTs on both the ladders and the engines, which is extremely helpful for us. They're able to assist us on calls if our supervisor might be tied up and we just need an extra set of hands. I would say anywhere from maybe 80 to 90% of them are EMTs at this point. So it's an extra set of hands for us, and they have the knowledge. And it's nice that we've taught them to where they've come through our EMT programs. So they have that help, like that upper hand with being able to help us and assist us on calls when needed.
And when you guys go on calls with the fire side, of course now you guys are part of the fire department, now you're on your own entity, and that's still a good relationship?
Yes.
When we go to a call and everybody works hand in hand together, and which is good. I mean, even though you're split from the fire department, your own entity now, sometimes that can have some bad feelings, but...
Yep, we always say we're here for the citizens of the city, right?
Yeah, and that's
our main mission and our main goal is to serve the city and the residents that live here. So the main goal, whether it's with fire, it's with police, our main goal is to make sure that we're serving the city in which we work. That's our priority, is making sure that they're safe. So we have to have that family dynamic to be able to work together.
So when you guys transport someone to the hospital, let's say a cardiac arrest, and before you even leave the scene, you guys are working on them in the ambulance, trying to get them back and so forth. When they get to the hospital, when you guys do the transport to the hospital, are you involved with that in the emergency room, or now you step back and the nurses and the doctors, or do you still have an active role in that?
It's more of a passive role. Once we transfer care, once the patient's off our stretcher and on the hospital's bed, it's considered transfer of care of the patient to a higher level of care. But that being said, it doesn't mean that we necessarily immediately leave. Sometimes we have a very close working relationship with the hospitals that we were in. We spend a lot of time in there. We know a lot of the personnel personally. So there's oftentimes where if it's a significant call, it's nothing routine, things like that, or there's a significant chance to save the person, we'll generally stay in the room for a little while, help the hospital, not necessarily mostly hands-on, but more just kind of be there, answer any questions the doctors may have, nurses may have, because we saw what was happening on scene, they didn't. So there's questions that may come up afterwards that could be pertinent to helping that person. So we generally kind of stay as close as we can for as long as we can.
And particularly now, I mean, nurses and doctors are scarce because the emergency room is like packed.
Yeah.
And if they're treating another critical patient, you guys go in, you're second hands and eyes on that patient because you've already been dealing with that patient. So just to leave that patient and walk away, that's not good either. So you guys continue your care, if you have to do it as well.
So we can't really, our protocols don't allow us to continue care in the ER. Once we, like Lieutenant Finnegan said, once we transfer that care over to the hospital, they are now considered a patient in the hospital. That doesn't mean that if a nurse or a doctor says to one of our paramedics, hey, I need help, whether it's doing CPR or helping a nurse get stuff together, that our medics won't step in and help, but they're not covered at that point.
So it's a liability.
Our protocols kind of stop where we are once we've transferred care over. Once we transfer care, they are now in the hospital's care. They are no longer in care of Florida EMS.
So unless you are a training paramedic in the emergency room, not working on the ambulance, but you're training to be a paramedic, so now you can step in and help.
They can do skills. Yep.
Okay.
They're working under the nurse and doctor's certifications at that time.
You know what? It comes down to everything, liability.
Yep.
Absolutely.
You got to be careful what you're doing. It's all liability. I mean, some of these TV shows, you see the paramedic or whatever, it's on top of the stretcher and doing compressions and all this stuff, and people eat that stuff right up, and I know it's not the reality of that stuff. I remember one time I was in the ambulance. Matter of fact, it was with Joe Reagan, way back in the day, and there was a car accident, and I was asked to jump in the back of the ambulance. He was bagging the person, and I was doing compressions, and all of a sudden we took a turn. I get, And he said, keep going. I says, I think I just broke something. He said, I think I broke all the guy's ribs in his chest. And he says, keep going. He keep going. Don't stop. And I'm saying to myself, I'm going to kill this poor guy. But
You actually want...
But that happens all the time.
You actually want to feel that. You're not breaking the ribs. What happens is your ribs are attached to your sternum with cartilage, and you're actually just breaking that cartilage away from the sternum, and you actually want to feel that. You want to feel that break, per se, underneath your hands. It just means that you're getting good depth to make sure that you're actually pumping the heart for them.
So that could be a good thing. It's not a bad thing if you hear that.
Not a bad thing if you hear it.
Yeah, and I was like, you know, he said, keep going, keep going. And he didn't explain that to me. But yeah, that was an experience. So to become an EMT in Florida, besides being a paramedic, well, of course, there's a cost to that as well, I would imagine.
Yes.
Is there a cost to be a former EMT? Is they have to pay for the classes and stuff, or the books and all that stuff, I would imagine?
So if you come to our EMT school here in the city, it's $1,800. And that includes your book. And that also includes the fee for the state to come down and do your practical exam.
Okay.
Other programs throughout the state, their prices can vary. I don't want to say what they are because I don't truthfully know roughly what they cost. I just know that ours is about $1,800, and that does include all of the class time and the book that is involved with it.
So how about these private companies, private entities that do EMT courses and classes, and they graduate from that particular school, whatever it may be? Did the city recognize that, or you have to do city protocol as well?
Nope, we recognize it. We put them through our own orientation when they get hired with us. So we go over pretty much our department policies, but the standard to teach, we go by a national standard. So every program, whether you take an EMT program in Massachusetts, in Texas, in California, the standard is the same. We teach to a national standard, and then when you go state to state, we may teach you our protocols that the state puts out for us. So we can do things in Massachusetts that somebody may not be able to do in Rhode Island, but somebody in Alaska may be able to do something that we can't do here in Mass. So we do teach to those standards for the state, but as a whole for the program, it is just a national standard that we teach to.
Yeah, because Rhode Island has, it's cardiac EMTs, right, or paramedics, or whatever. So what's the difference? I mean,
it's considered an advanced. So that's what the advanced is, with a couple extra things that a cardiac can do.
Okay.
A cardiac in Rhode Island will be able to put a patient on a monitor. They can have a special waiver to intubate patients. They can give more medications. So it's a special waiver that they do get where they can take it on top of their advanced program.
So Providence, I don't know much about Providence Fire, but EMTs and paramedics are actually firefighters as well, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Or are they two separate?
I'm not entirely sure. From what I understand, that I believe everyone for the city of Providence is cross-trained as fire and EMS.
And
Yes.
EMS.
I'm not entirely sure, though. I can't be quoted on that, but I'm pretty sure that's how they run.
So for people that listen to the scanners, you hear Squad 11 and Squad 12. And I know what Squad 11 and Squad 12 is. So explain, we have a few minutes left, explain what Squad 11 actually does.
You want it?
Sure. So Squad 11 is our medical command for EMS calls in the city that is operated on a 24-hour truck run by 4 different lieutenants, and it is our your field command and your field officer. It's always going to be a lieutenant. Sometimes a captain may fill in, but generally it'll be a lieutenant on that truck. And they're an overseeing supervisor for the shift. They're always a paramedic as well, so they will also be on there as just an extra set of hands on scene. They kind of govern the day-to-day operations in the field. They oversee everything that's happening between crews, but they're also a Class 5 ambulance, so they carry all the same tools and intervention capabilities that all the ambulances have. They're just unable to transport in that truck itself.
And Squad 12 is basically the same thing, but they do nursing homes and stuff such as that. Is that what Squad 12
yeah,
does?
so Squad 12 is staffed with 1 lieutenant and 3 community paramedics. So they are the intercept vehicle for our MIH division, our Mobile Integrated Health Division. So if a patient goes into St. Anne's or Charlton and they need to get transferred to Boston or to Providence to a higher level of care, and they need a paramedic to go, that paramedic from Squad 12 will jump on the ambulance and transport with them. They see the day-to-day operations of the MIH, our MIH division. So they will do, they do home visits, which we're starting to do. So they'll actually go into people's homes, take vital signs, work with the hospitals. They can administer medications at home and trying to keep those patients in a home setting.
EMS come a long way.
It has.
They have, from when EMS first started in the city, I remember a couple of ambulances and they got a third ambulance, so forth. And now you guys are running, what, how many ambulances during the day? I mean, it depends on if you have people on call.
6.
It's 5 911 trucks.
Yeah, and even, it's pretty ironic how when you
11.
say,
11, yeah.
We have 11 ambulances and then the 2 squads.
right, so you're running how many a day?
All 11 run a day. We have 5 911 trucks that are dedicated to the city of Fall River. So if you call 911, one of those 5 trucks will show up. If those 5 trucks are on calls and they cannot go to a 6th call, we'll call one of our MIH trucks and they'll respond. And if they're not available, then that's when we'll go out to mutual aid.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny because when you hear you guys are talking about all those ambulances being in service during the day, sometimes they have to call Freetown, Somerset, Tibbet, and I hear it all the time. And it's like amazing how many medical calls we have in the city. Mm-hmm. A lot of it's overdoses. A lot of it's just common colds, colds for colds and stuff. And but you have to pick up everybody in transport. I mean, sometimes I hear you have refusals. So when you get to the scene, they refuse medical treatment, right? Yep. So you have to sign a waiver that, you know, they refuse medical treatment from you guys.
Yeah, there's certain parameters that we can forcefully bring someone to the hospital. It's very limited in when we can and cannot do that. But in the state of Massachusetts, if somebody requests to go to the ambulance, we cannot refuse. So even if it's, you know, something very benign, if they feel they need to be seen at the hospital, then we will gladly take them to the hospital. We are not, it's not our prerogative or not our place to tell them that they don't need a hospital. That is not how we operate. It's our job to encourage them to go if they feel it's necessary or we feel it's necessary. It's our job to take them to the hospital. We cannot tell them not to go to the hospital.
And all the ambulance rides are billed through their insurance company, I would imagine?
Yep, everything gets billed through their insurance, and then whatever the copay may be, you'll get a bill from the city for your copay. But we do bill your private insurance company.
What's the average cost for an ambulance run? I
don't even know.
I think if it's a basic call where no paramedic interventions are going, probably $2,000 before insurance, and then if it's a medic level call, it really depends on the mileage that they're going, any medications or skills that we may be doing, but it's pretty much a flat rate is what they bill for.
So if you don't need an ambulance, don't call an ambulance because I guess it's
call us if you need us. Yeah.
It gets expensive. But no, you know, once again, EMS, you guys do a great job. I mean, I've seen the progression over the years from way back from Ferguson and all those guys back in the day. So most recent, now it's not the director of EMS, it's chief of EMS.
Chief of EMS.
So at the present date, you have some good people in that. One of the good guys as well was just retired. He's up in Maine.
Yes.
So he's enjoying himself with the deer and in the woods.
His retirement, yes.
He's retiring. So thank you once again
Thank
for joining
you for having
me.
us.
That's the show of you on public safety. If you have any questions on any of this stuff, you feel free to call EMS office, and the captain and lieutenant will answer the questions for you. And who else? Who would be up there to answer questions?
Maybe our captain or lieutenant of operations can answer pretty much most questions. They're in our office with us, so we pretty much work hand in hand with them on a daily basis. So they'll be able to answer any questions that you might have.
So Captain Beth and Lieutenant Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the information.
Thank you very much.
That's our show on View on Public Safety. Thank you.